is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, and thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Tholhungva. Here are the headlines for Wednesday, July 22nd, 2020. 80 crew members on a fishing vessel in Alaska test positive for the coronavirus. That's more than 2/3 of the crew on board. The boat, named American Triumph, docked in Dutch Harbor in the Aleutian Islands. That's home to several Alaska Native tribes, including the Kalawinin people in Unalaska. This is exactly what Alaska Native leaders feared would happen during the fishing season. Leaders warned the villages could not handle large groups infected with the virus because of their remote locations and having few clinics. More than 100 crew members were screened at the local clinic in Unalaska. Some returned to the ship and others were put in isolation in the village. Unalaska does not have a critical care hospital. The nearest emergency department is in Anchorage, nearly 1,000 miles away. A company spokesperson says the ship and crew are now on their way to Seward and then to Anchorage to recover. The ship, which is owned by American Seafoods Group, will be sanitized before continuing to fish in the Bering Sea. In Oklahoma, the state Supreme Court rules the governor's gambling agreement with tribes is prohibited. Governor Kevin Stitt, who is Cherokee, overstepped his authority when reaching the agreements with the Comanche Nation and the Oto Missouri tribes. The deals would have allowed for wagering on sporting events and house-banked card and table games, and allow new casinos near large population centers, which would have given the state a larger share of the revenues from the new casinos. However, the state legislature did not authorize wagering, so any revenue from such games is prohibited, the court ruled. Researchers are looking for Native people to take their Indigenous Futures survey. Questions center around how COVID-19 is affecting daily life and democratic engagement. Individuals can take the 15-minute survey online, and it is confidential. This is a joint project between the Center for Native American Youth, Illuminative, and the Native Organizers Alliance. Their goal is to gather information about the priorities of Native people in preparation for the 2020 election. Their survey ends August 1st. As the deadline draws near to complete the 2020 census, there are still jobs available for census workers. Many rural areas, such as tribal reservations, have openings for census workers both in the field and office work. You can see a map of locations that are hiring by visiting the census website. The count in Indian Country is important, say tribal leaders, who also recognize the impact the pandemic is having on families returning their census forms. And now for an update on COVID-19 in Indian Country, let's go to Jordan Benebigay. Jordan?
Yate Patty, Yate Shikisto Shidine. So the Center for Disease Control and Prevention released a study saying that the number of people who have COVID-19 in most US regions could be 6 to 24 times higher than the reported rate from late March to early May. And it's based on the COVID-19 antibody tests performed on routine blood samples in 16,000 people in 10 US regions that showed many with the virus antibody. And in Indian Country, the cases continue to climb as well as the number of deaths. The total number of deaths have passed the 600 mark. And here's a look at the latest numbers from our database. There are 14,673 positive cases and 603 deaths in the Indian health system. Again, that's a total of 14,673 positive cases and 603 deaths as of July 22nd. The Cherokee Nation, Oklahoma, reported an increase of 49 cases. The tribal nation has a total of 567 altogether. In North Carolina, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians reported 5 new cases and 1 additional death, bringing its total to 102 cases and 3 deaths. And in New Mexico, the Mescalero Apache tribe announced 13 new cases on its reservation. The tribe has a total of 33 cases and 1 death. And the tribe says they have about 19 people who are recovered. And this really brings up a good question, Patty, as on what makes a person recovered, right? And what constitutes a person recovered is different from tribe to tribe and state to state. For the Pyramid Lake Paiute, a recovered individual is a person who has had 2 tests done over a 24-hour period, and both are negative. The Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians in Mississippi defines a recovered individual as going 7 days without symptoms and 3 days without fever-reducing medications. And the CDC has two options for those who have had COVID-19, and when recovered individuals can be around other people.
Interesting definitions of how people are deemed recovered. We'll continue to follow that angle too. Jordan Benebigay, thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll be right back.
This is Indian Country Today.
As tribes continue to grapple with the coronavirus pandemic, one thing has become evident. There is a lack of housing on reservations nationwide. What resources are available besides tribal housing that can alleviate this shortage? In 2003, tribal leaders from Arizona and New Mexico met to discuss the issue of the lack of capital from the private sector for projects on reservations. The result was identifying the need for a business to help bridge that gap. One of the businesses created is Native Community Capital. This team works with tribes, individuals, entrepreneurs to help them access private sector capital for projects on reservations. Dave Castillo is the CEO of Native Community Capital, and he joins us today. Welcome, Dave.
Good morning, Patty.
Well, give us an idea of the size of loans that your company has made to small businesses on reservations, the microloans. Let's start there.
Sure. We recently did a microloan for a potter at the Pueblo of Laguna. She had a workspace and she wanted to convert it into a little bit of a showroom. So when people come out to look at her pieces, she's got some shelving, some drywall, some nice lighting. And so we were able to not only get her out of a high-priced loan, she had got this, it's kind of like a big storage shed from a border town, and they charged her this ridiculous interest rate. So we basically paid off her little, her shed, her workshop. And then with the savings, we're actually able to give her additional money to do the upgrades. That was about a $10,000 loan. And then we've also done a laundromat up at Navajo Nation. That was about $300,000. And that was for the machines and for utility and electrical and other upgrades that were needed to get that online.
So some good examples of a small micro loan to a much larger loan for businesses on reservations.
Right.
You also do lending for housing. And in this climate today, what has changed when it comes to banks and lending to Native people on reservations?
Right. Yeah. Now is a strange, scary, and interesting time for a lot of different reasons. But we've been doing this work for a long time. I've been working specifically in the finance industry since about 2006. And, banks' interest has ebbed and flowed over the years. And after the last recession, a lot of the bank's interest kind of went away. And back during Bill Clinton's administration, it was at kind of an all-time high. Well, here we are in the midst of the coronavirus and some really interesting times with regard to George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, coronavirus, economic issues that have cropped up because of all those things. And all of a sudden, we're getting a lot of interest from banks to say, hey, we want to do the right thing and get back into serving tribes. So that's been really welcome and exciting. And I always say, throughout my career, it's been troubling to see opportunities come and go. And a lot of times tribal governments aren't ready to kind of hit the ground running when those opportunities present themselves. So us as a small organization focused exclusively on getting financing to tribes and tribal members, now that it's come along, we're ready and we're able to jump on it. So the fact is there's more organizations like ours that are serving tribal members, and there's more money coming online to finance those types of financial product needs. And so that's kind of a big part. And I'd love to go over the numbers at some point, but if you compare it to kind of what's happened historically, I think I sent over a graph to your office. You can see that that banks just have not been around, and everyone knows that, right? if you want to go do your banking, you're likely not going to find a bank on the reservation. So I think that's because of the work that we've been doing and a lot of our partners, that's becoming more of a reality in these times, as strange times as they are. Um, sometimes there's a silver lining. I think this might be one of them.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how in this, it's like this, I don't want to say a perfect storm, but it's some kind of a storm where
Mm,
we're in this pandemic and then we're having huge civil unrest across the country
right,
that's really making people wake up. And the pandemic, as I mentioned, is showing that shortage of housing within our tribal communities. Let's talk specifically about the HUD 184 program,
yeah,
because that's a guaranteed loan.
right.
Explain how that works.
Yeah, so sometimes it's a little bit of a misnomer, right? If the average person hears guaranteed loan, sometimes they think I'm guaranteed to get a loan. That's not exactly what that means. What it means is that the federal government, in this case, has said, look, banks, we know you guys aren't out there serving tribal communities, but as an incentive to serve them, what happens is if you make a loan to a tribal member through this program, we will guarantee that if there is a default, meaning if the person can't pay their mortgage, you as the banker will get made whole. We'll pay that off on their behalf. Now, that doesn't relieve the tribal member of their obligation, right? I mean, what it means is that the bank can say, hey, instead of avoiding tribal lands and avoiding serving Native Americans, there's this little bit of incentive, and we're going to go ahead and use it. Unfortunately, historically, I think the issue is really we need both parties to meet in the middle. You know what I'm saying? A tribal member or a tribal elected leader needs to do some work, right? On the tribal government side, they need to get it approved as a 184 tribe, meaning that HUD has looked at their mortgage ordinance as well as their land documents and said, okay, you guys are good to go. We can enforce these on your behalf, et cetera, et cetera. A tribal member needs to work on their credit, right? If they don't have a good credit history, they got to get ready to do that. On the other hand, the banks need to kind of say, hey, we've been shirking our responsibility here. We're not serving everybody that we could. And so let's put some money aside. Let's put some time aside. Let's hire some natives, for goodness sake, and go out there and look to serve tribal members better. So again, both parties have some work to do. And that's why historically it's not been available. But again, right now, there's a lot of interest. So if you're an individual and you've got some credit issues maybe that you need to take care of, but you haven't, call us. We can help you kind of work through that. If you're ready for a mortgage and you've just been kind of thinking, it's too much of a hassle, call us. We can help you get through that too. If you're a bank and you want to do something in any country, call us. Make an investment so that we can help tribal members and tribes get access to these types of resources.
And the 184 program has been around for what, like 20 years?
Over 20 years. Yeah, it even
And how
predates NAHASDA, which is the legislation governing tribal housing.
the Native American Housing
Assistance and Self-Determination Act, NAHASDA. Yeah,
HASDA. Thank you. An acronym sometimes are very long.
right.
So
Sorry.
the and in the 20 years that the HUD 184 program has been around, what is the majority? Where do the majority of those loans end up?
Yeah, so I hope you're able to kind of share the graphic I sent you. It's a research that was done out of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, and I was really happy to see it when it came out because it's the exact same data that we had when I was working at the bank, and it's all based on information that's collected from lenders and whatnot. And it shows that less than 10% of the loans, specifically for Native Americans through the 184 program, less than 10% have been done on tribal trust lands. So that means that the banks basically decided, we could still serve natives, but we're going to do it where, in territory that we understand a little bit better, in cities and towns, right? Albuquerque, Phoenix, Denver, LA, Seattle. These are all a different type of land status and less risk to the lender. So that's where the business has gone. I think you'll see a lot of it in Alaska and Southeast Alaska and Oklahoma as well, because their land status is different than the rest of the tribes. So that's where a lot of the business went. But again, that can change, and more tribes are starting to kind of get what they need in place to be able to do these.
And then you mentioned that there's been a change in the attitude from banks in this
Yeah.
current climate. What changes specifically are you seeing? How are you seeing that?
I'll tell you real specifically, the bank regulators, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency and the FDIC convened a bankers roundtable around Native American lending opportunities. And they do this quite frequently, on all types of different topics. But this time it was on opportunities for lending on tribal lands or to Native Americans. And they received the largest number of um, participants from banks around the country than they ever had before. And it's probably about 40, 45 banks. I think there was 55 people online and another 65 called in on the phone. And so, to be able to hear that from the regulator and say, wow, we got a huge response. And as a matter of fact, the reason they did this session is because banks were saying, who can we talk to? How can we find out how we can make an investment in Indian country? And so they put the session together. So that's one indicator. And then the other indicator is, just getting calls out of the blue from banks and saying, hey, how can we help? How can we make an investment? What can we do? And usually that process is, pretty grueling, right? And one bank yesterday said, look, we can close a deal with you within 30 to 60 days, which is just unheard of. I mean, trying to get access to private capital through large financial institutions is usually not a piece of cake. I'm not saying it's there yet, but the interest is there. So we're pursuing that. It's a good time.
And it sounds a very different attitude there, and yet tribes are dealing with so much right now. They're dealing with trying to figure out how to handle this coronavirus still, and until a vaccine is in place, which there's varying reports on how long that will happen, that will take to happen. So in the list of priorities, where is this for tribes and where is this for individuals? Because in many cases, the individual could also apply for these loans. Where should this be as a priority?
Well, I think it is for tribal leadership. I would say, this is definitely a COVID intervention type activity, right? If you've got an agreement or a policy that's been on the tribal council docket for a long time that can help you do this, now's the time to take a look at it, because at the end of the day, it means increasing your housing stock. It means, more housing, home additions, new bathrooms so people can social distance.
Yes. Okay. Well, Dave Castillo with Native Community Capital, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back. Welcome back. Dalton Walker is the national correspondent for Indian Country Today, and he joins us now to talk sports and racist mascots. Welcome, Dalton.
Bonjour, Patty. Miigwech for having me.
Well, first, happy birthday. Yesterday was your birthday, and news broke of the Edmonton team. Of course, it happens when you're taking a day off. So happy birthday, and tell us what's new with the Edmonton team.
Thank you for the shout out. Well, it finally appears that the Edmonton Canadian football team is changing its controversial nickname after all. The team announced this week that it will discontinue their name and be simply known as Edmonton Football Team until a new name is picked. The news comes less than 3 weeks after the football franchise said it wasn't changing.
And so what happened to have them have a change of heart? And the name that they did have, how did that impact the Alaska Native people?
Well, it definitely impacted Alaska Native people, and also impacted the First Nation community in Canada as well. Some people on social and even in other news reports mentioned how the name needed to be changed. Of course, some didn't really have an opinion or said it was a fine name. But it just boils down to that simply people probably shouldn't be mascots. and the wave of change has come, and it comes right after the Washington NFL football team made their announcement that they were finally changing their mascots.
And that's certainly, in this political climate and in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd, people are finally starting to pay attention to situations and cases where for years Native people have said, we don't want this. This is not honoring us. These mascots harm our children and even our adults, because it's been going on for so long now. So again, what was that change for this team in particular? Was there anything that they pointed to that said made them change from their stance 3 weeks ago, saying they're not going to change, to today?
They made an announcement. I think they were pressured by local media and people up in Alberta area and even the broader Canada if they were going to make a change. And they initially said through the research they weren't going to. They had to support all this other stuff. But then things started coming out regarding sponsorship, and it's similar to the way the Washington football ended up changing when the money started asking, "Hey, do we need this? Can it be changed?" They started to listen to those people, and unfortunately it sounded like they didn't really listen to the people who asked for change simply because it was offensive.
Yes, it comes back to money. And again, with the sponsors, which, also the sponsors knew 10 years ago when people were asking to have that mascot changed, not just in Edmonton, but in other states, such as even the Cleveland team or other teams that are out there. So again, we can't help but make those connections that in this political climate today, in the aftermath of George Floyd, more and more awareness is being raised, and now attention is finally being paid to the work that a lot of Native groups have been doing for a long time. So from the Alaska Native perspective, or the First Nations people in Canada, what have they said about this name change decision?
This well, multiple people have come out against it. One said it was just basically about time. They're glad that Canada's finally doing something, kind of taking a broader view at the States, kind of shifting gears finally. So that type of message is there. A lot of younger advocates are just saying this name is something that doesn't acknowledge who they are, and it shouldn't even be a talk. It should have been changed long ago. But like you were saying, there's a window, and unfortunately it came at the expense of George Floyd, and through the voices of the Black Lives Matter movement, all these injustices that have been happening to a lot of people, specifically Native people, are finally being heard. And I guess now that the question remains is who's next, as many advocates continue to demand change across the board.
That's right. And so we'll keep an eye on that as well. Let's shift gears a little bit here, Dalton. This weekend, the WNBA will start its shortened season, and of course, I'm rooting for my Phoenix Mercury. But this is also the week of the anniversary when Shoni Schimmel just dominated at the WNBA All-Stars game.
Yeah, it was definitely a great memory to walk down 6 years ago. Shoni Schimmel, who's a role model to many in any country, had arguably her most exciting and impressive moment on the basketball court when she played in the 2014 All-Star game as a starter. She scored 29 points and wowed the crowd. Was even named team or the game MVP after helping lead her team to victory. It was just an exciting night, and I actually watched the replay recently, and you could still feel the momentum and even get chills watching.
Well, there's that great photo of her when she, I think she dunked on Brittany Griner, who's probably a couple of feet taller than she is practically. And there's that picture where she's like in Brittany's face, and it just looks like this really short person going up against this really tall person there. And of course, Griner's on the Mercury. But yeah, so to now we're looking at the new season, and any word that I know the youngest Schimmel sister is now playing in a league, or actually in college.
Yeah, Shoni comes from a rich family of a family of rich basketball. Her sister Jude, as you know, played with her at the University of Louisville and briefly played pro basketball in Europe. Their younger sister, Milan, who I profiled earlier this year, is set to start Division I basketball at the University of Cincinnati in the fall. And they actually have a younger brother who just finished up a stellar high school basketball career. So I guess time will tell if we already have seen the best Schimmel on the basketball court. And with the sports finally happening and the WNBA coming back, fingers crossed that it does. Like, it'll be exciting just to see basketball again. And it'd be nice just to kind of follow along with the Schimmels, as it seemed like more and more just keep popping up in the basketball world.
Very good. Dalton Walker, thank you so much.
Thank you, Patty.
And thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. Your life is precious. I'm Patty Tholahungva. Thanks for joining us.
This is Indian Country Today.